What if I told you that atheists could be Quakers too? Now, I know that might for some seem a bit of a contradiction. After all, Quakers are considered a religious group. We're called the Religious Society of Friends. And certainly stereotypes put us down as being quite old-fashioned. But here's the surprising part. Quakerism has never really been about creeds or dogma. It's about how we live, how we listen, and how we come together in meeting. And that means that there's room for people who don't actually believe in God at all, yet who still find great and deep meaning in the Quaker way. In this video, we're going to explore precisely how that might work and how it might change how you think about Quakerism as well. So in the comments of quite a lot of my videos, I hear from atheists who say, I really quite like Quakerism. It sounds really interesting, but I'm an atheist, and I'm happy being an atheist. And so I think, but if I were to be religious, I think I'd be a Quaker or something along those lines. And what I've always been responding in that comment is, you could be a Quaker and an atheist. And that, I think, causes quite a lot of confusion. But I'd say in meetings around the UK, certainly in liberal Quakerism, there's a reasonable amount of people who are on the agnostic atheist spectrum side of religious society, as opposed to people on the other side who may be more grounded in Christianity or another faith background. People might also be confused listening to my videos and me coming out and saying this because I have said quite openly that I am a Christian Quaker. But that is by no means the way that Quakerism is understood by many. Another caveat might be that this, I think, ultimately is perhaps a feature of liberal Quakerism that you don't see in other strands of Quakerism. So if you went to an evangelical Quaker meeting, for example, in Africa or in America, if you went to a conservative Quaker meeting, they probably wouldn't be as welcoming of atheists as liberal Quakers would. But I want to explain today how an atheist might interpret Quakerism and how that's actually a part of our tradition going from the beginning. The first friends certainly were and identified as Christian. But what they were doing is they were rejecting a lot of the tradition, the rituals that they found in the Church of England, the hierarchy that they found in the Church of England at the time, and uniting under the idea of that of God in everyone, and that Christ had come to teach his people himself. So you can hear in that phrase already, this is quite Christian language, and they were Christians. But what it allows is this understanding that what is of primal importance is direct inward revelation, and that we do this by waiting in silence, listening for this revelation, in which there is no priest, or you could argue that everyone is a priest or a minister, and no hierarchy as well. It creates this idea of radical equality that's inherent and has been inherent throughout Quaker history, where people's personal testimonies, when they're being led by the Spirit, has to be truthful and has to be respected. So Quakerism certainly has Christian roots that cannot be denied. But as we get into especially the 20th century, by which time splits in Quakerism had already happened, being influenced by things like the Enlightenment, science, rationalism, all those things, it became increasingly common in this point for many friends to value social witness and ethics over doctrine. And I would argue actually that Quakers have never been fussed about doctrine. Doctrine isn't so important. It's a practice, it's a belief, it's a way, rather than you must believe this, otherwise you are not a Quaker. So this was at the turning point of the 20th century, certainly in Britain. I suppose you could argue it's as well quite a humanist move as well. There was a great focus on peace, on justice, on integrity, on social reform. And because of these trends, these Quakers became more involved with other people from perhaps other backgrounds who maybe weren't Christian. In the same way that perhaps in the previous century, many Quakers were being influenced by other Christian circles and were being led to a more biblical understanding of Quakerism. So you kind of see how these two strands are being put further apart, I suppose you could argue. So by the time that you got to the mid 1900s, so the 1960s and so on, the Swarthmore Lecture, which is often seen as the main theological lecture given by Quakers, in 1968, it was delivered by William H. Thorpe, titled Quakers and the Humanists. And this was probably the first explicit lecture which was opening up Quakerism to a humanist and non-theist understanding of the tradition. Other big milestones maybe was the publication of Godless for Godless Sake, which was edited by David Bolton, a well-known Atheist Quaker, and that was published, I think, in 2006. Yeah, 2006. And in 2011, the Non-Theist Friends Network was set up. I want to stress, on the other hand, as well, obviously, though, that this doesn't mean that all Quakers are non-theist either. There certainly is a growing group of non-theist friends, and they might use terms like non-theist, atheist, or agnostic. I know there's differences between those. I'm kind of lumping them together as not necessarily ultimately believing in a Christian God or convinced of that. And in terms of numbers in the UK, there's lots of different stats, but it's seemingly is not the majority, but could be as high as maybe 40%. So the question might be then, well, what is a atheist Quaker actually doing in meeting then? And I don't want to speak for atheists, because there's probably, like with Christian friends, there's probably a whole range of different ways of understanding what they feel is going on. Some might see it simply as a time for reflection. Some might see it as maybe a bit more mystical than that, like focusing on feeling something of the universe, maybe. Some might see it as a time to contemplate what needs to be changed in the world and how best to organize and lead and take part in social action and things like that. They may simply ask the question, what does love require of us? And see what comes to them in that mode of silent meeting. And I'm sure there's loads of others, but what I mean is it certainly happens. And these Quakers are often very important in the local meetings as well, and very active. And I suppose also, although yes, inwardly different things might be going on, outwardly we're doing the same thing, which does create a certain element of unity in terms of we meet in silence, we give ministry when prompted, we believe in that of God in everyone. I've heard some atheists use the phrase instead, that of good in everyone. I don't particularly enjoy that. But as I said, this isn't about my own personal views here. The testimonies of simplicity, truth, equality, and peace can all be understood in a humanist, non-theist framework. And as I said, can actually be really powerful in terms of leading to real change and powerful, deep ministry. These testimonies, you could argue, from a very Christian background as well. You could say, well, they're coming from the Beatitudes of the Sermon on the Mount, for example, whereas you could also see it as the highest form of human ethics, maybe. And both are true. I mean, I see these as more powerful when understood as the messages and teachings of the inward teacher and Jesus. But if someone else doesn't, and it still leads them to walk in the light, then that's fine by me. I would rather be challenged by their ministry and reflect on that than not have them in the room at all. It means in meeting that, depending on who's giving ministry, you do have to listen in a different way. You have to contemplate it a little bit deeper, because they may not ultimately be speaking your ministry language. So you have to translate it maybe, or see how it affects you just as is. But don't dismiss it just because someone isn't using the same language as you are. It's a humility and a good practice of deeper understanding of other people with radically different views, whether or not you believe in God or not, and not to be offended by that, but to see what truth might be there and what love requires of you as well. And, we talk about non-theists and theists in Quakerism a lot, but we also have to be aware of the fact that there are people coming from different backgrounds entirely, for which this plays such a minor role. I think also we're lucky with some of the terminology, and I think some of the terminology has become more popular, especially in the rise of non-theist friends, in terms of the phrases we use. So the idea of the light, for example, has become really popular, especially the phrase the inner light, in the 20th century. And I think that's a phrase which is a lot easier to unite behind as an atheist Quaker than talking about God, or even maybe the divine, which is my personal favorite. Though I can imagine some agnostic types probably being all for the divine. So why might atheists want to go to a Quaker meeting anyway, if it's not for spiritual revelation? So I said, one, they might want to come for silence and reflection without the dogma. Because silent worship is silent, there's no sermon or liturgy, so there's no real pressure to believe in a deity. And so it's a chance for the atheist maybe to sit in company, to reflect, to rest the mind, all that sort of thing, without being told what to think. And I think that can be very liberating. They might also come because they want to be part of a community, but without a creed. And so, this means that Quakerism is one of the few places where atheists can go, where they can still be part of where they can be part of a religious community without being forced to change or feel like their integrity has been compromised somehow. They might obviously be drawn by our values and ethical living. So perhaps an atheist who really cares for social justice, fairness, non-violence might find alignment with a lot of Quakers and feel they want to be part of the group without feeling that they need to change who they are. I think also they might come because of the respectful personal experience. You're given the room to share your own insights and to go on a journey as well. You may come as an atheist, you may not be an atheist 5 years, 10 years down the line, or you might be, but it allows you to have a journey on a deeper level than maybe you might otherwise have been on. It was through Quaker meeting that I certainly became a Christian Quaker. I suppose I wasn't a Christian or a Quaker before, but you get my point. So there's a lived experience there, which continues to maybe inform atheism, or might lead somewhere else. And lastly, I guess it might be an idea that people might be drawn to the inclusive and welcoming community, where there's a mixture of Christians, non-Christians, people from different faiths, people from the LGBTQ plus community, the young, the elderly. There's a real mix there. And when one of the fundamental understandings is equality and welcome, then that might be very attractive to certain groups of atheists. It can mean it's a safe place for dialogue, for searching, for doubt, without fear of being rejected. So where does this all leave us then? So we've seen that Quakerism is a broad and spacious tradition. It began in the 17th century with a radical message that you don't need priests, you don't need creeds, you don't need traditions, you don't need someone else telling you what is true. What matters is inward revelation, community, and the way we live our values in the world today. And so this openness means that Quakerism welcomes people who don't believe in Christianity or a God of any form at all. For some, the inner light is the presence of God, but for others, it's the voice of conscience, or simply the spark of compassion that draws us to treat others with dignity. However you understand it, what Quakerism is fundamentally about is about listening deeply to yourself, to others, and to what calls you to live with integrity. And again, Quakerism is not about drawing lines and cutting people out. Quite the opposite. It's about making space and making others welcome, no matter of their theology, where they can gather in silence, reflect on the things that really matter, and then put that into practice every day. And with the world being as it is, I think that's more valuable today than perhaps it's ever been. So, atheist friends, hello there. How do you understand Quakerism from an atheist perspective or from an agnostic perspective? Was it one of these things? Is it something else? Let me know. If you're an atheist and not yet a Quaker, do you find these arguments convincing? If not, why not? Let me know and I'll answer that in the comments. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching and I will see you in the next video.
Thank you very much for watching the video. If you liked it, please do click on the thumbs up and the subscribe button to get more videos about Quakerism in the UK today. It really does help, and thanks once again.